Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Dr. Brenda Greene. I am the founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College and director of the National Black Writers Conference. I am also a professor of English, and I welcome you to Writers on Writing. We come on every Sunday, and we are now doing this virtually. And I'm very, very pleased to have with me on Zoom today and to participate in a conversation with one of our 15th National Black Writers honorees, a phenomenal playwright and actress, and welcome, Dominique Morisseau. Yeah. Welcome. Thank you for giving us the privilege of honoring you. So I'd just like to share with our audience some background about you, and then we'll get into a conversation about your work and your craft and your goals and what you're doing now. So Dominique Morisseau is an American playwright and actress from Detroit, Michigan, hence Detroit 67. And she's authored over 9 plays, 3 of which are part of a cycle, the Detroit Projects. She's also a recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant for 2018. And just want to say kudos to that. That is really an honor. She wrote the Blackness Blues, Time to Change, the tune, A Sister Story in college. And after college, she received a playwright fellowship at the Lark Play Development Center. And she also worked as a teaching artist with the City University of New York's Creative Arts team. And I think that's about the time when we first met her, because she also worked as a teaching artist for the Center for Black Literature and did a phenomenal job with our students. I think she worked at Bedford Academy, if I'm not mistaken. And she did a phenomenal job with helping our students bring poetry to life and doing a production. So Morisseau was on the list of the top 20 most produced American playwrights from 2015 to 2016, with 10 productions of her plays being produced nationwide. She's also a story editor for the television series Shameless, which is kind of interesting, and is accredited as a co-producer. And most recently, she wrote the book for the jukebox musical Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations, which I saw twice.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Just want to start with what motivated you to become an actress and a playwright?
I've always loved writing and performing arts since I was a kid. I mean, my mother was a teacher in Highland Park, Michigan, right inside of Detroit. And she taught there for 40 years, is one of the most economically stressed cities in our nation. And my mom was a dedicated teacher there for 40 years. And when I first came out of college, I taught there for a year, and I taught drama. And so I've just always really been into literature. My mother used to read to me. She used to make me read when I had to read the things I had to read from my class, and I had to read the things that she would give her students, And so I loved reading, and I love storytelling, and I love my own imagination. Yeah, and I just spent a lot of time reading at school, and particularly African American literature. It spoke to me. It stuck with me in my life. There are other books and things like that I've read outside of the African American literary canon that have impacted me in my life, but nothing more than the works of Black writers.
Some of those Black writers that impacted you?
Ann Petrie, her novel, The Street. Mildred D. Taylor, Let the Circle Be Unbroken, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Those were 2 books that really struck me when I was younger. Rosa Gee, who I just read her for pleasure. I wasn't assigned her in class, but I used to read novels on my own. And she had a book called The Friends that is one of my favorite young adult novels. Richard Wright, Native Son. Gwendolyn Brooks, her poetry, that both Richard Wright and Gwendolyn Brooks are mentioned in my play Pipeline, along with Ralph Ellison. I also grew up reading Pearl Clegg for my own pleasure, Nathan McCall, and Alex Haley. Like, I just was really a big fan.
I wonder if that's a function of growing up in a predominantly Black environment, Detroit, because I don't know if many young people, even in your age group, had that experience of being exposed to that many Black writers. Do you think that's a function of where you grew up?
I definitely think so. I mean, I always talk about Detroit in that way. It just was, our curriculums, were very, we were a part of our curriculum. Black people were a part of the curriculum that they were learning, and so, and then the city, Detroit has its own, it's an explosion of Black culture, Black literary culture, Black music culture. So we're going to learn about that, and then I think that was a big part of it. And also just, yeah, and that meant that I had Black teachers, Black principals in my school. So it was like the pedagogy of that was gonna trickle down all the way from leadership from our mayor, all the way on down to the teacher in the classroom.
That's a good message for today. And it's also a nice segue into the next question I want to ask you. Is about music, and music infuses everything you do in all of your work, in your plays and your, of course, poetry. Why is that a recurring theme in your work?
I'm a fan of music. I'm married to a music artist. My husband, Jay Keys, is a hip hop artist. And we grew up, we grew up on hip hop. We grew up on jazz. I grew up on Motown, obviously. And I also grew up dancing with my aunt. Her name is Carol Morisseau. She's a visual artist, but she also had a dance company. And I grew up dancing. So, in dance, I'm exposed to classical music, and I was exposed to a lot of like jazz and contemporary jazz, contemporary being in the 80s. And so, and I think that just shaped like the way that music also tells stories, and the way that music is in concert with our social vernacular, with preserving our culture. It's a partner to me in writing and in storytelling.
Of course, your most recent work, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, which I'm sorry is not being able to be performed, Broadway being dark. But what motivated you to tell their story?
So Ain't Too Proud, the musical, I'll give the whole title, but it's called Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. And what made me want to participate in telling that story, so obviously I grew up on Temptations music. They're my parents' favorite group, and so I just know their music so well, and I love it. And it's there's some songs that are iconic for my parents' generation, but they're also iconic for mine. I grew up with the different Temptations in my parents. Ollie Woodson was the lead singer of the Temptations when I was growing up, not David Ruffin, but they were still a part of. So I got to know the 80s Temptation songs, but they were still a part of my, like the entire fabric of the city of Detroit and my cultural upbringing. And so I had that relationship to their music, but then, and it's also personal, like what they meant, what they do mean now to the city of Detroit, if that was something. But then there was the other part. I was reading Otis Williams' biography, and I was struck when I was reading his biography that some of the questions, these were things that were not in the movie, because, everybody knows the Temptations movie that was like a 4-part miniseries, but in that movie, they did not deal with the political things that the Temptations were going through. And so when I was reading Otis's book, which, the movie was inspired by his book, and so was our musical. But when I was reading the book, I was like, wait, I didn't know this. I didn't know they were going to strike at Motown. I didn't know that. I didn't know that Otis wanted to write songs and didn't end up doing it. I didn't know some of the sacrifices that he made and that the group made in order to be what they are. And I didn't know what kind of civic unrest that they had to exist within. I mean, I know they were, around in the 60s, like obviously, but I didn't know how it personally, I didn't know how the Detroit uprising impacted the uprising of 1967. I didn't know how it personally impacted the Temptations. I would never be thinking about that.
Something, you made a really excellent point. That's something that when we think about the stories up until then of the musicians, they only focus on the music. And I think this is something what your generation has done, is that when they're telling the stories of individuals, they're also giving the history of that. They're giving the struggle that they went through. They're looking at all of the sociological dimensions and the politics around it. So they're giving you the story of social unrest in this country and the politics in this country. And as you said, they're interweaving that. And I think that's the gem of your generation. I think the black people from the Black arts movement were doing that too, but yours has expanded, is built on that and expanded it so that it's become more international.
Yeah.
So I think, that's really important.
And social media has helped our generation sort of pick up the torch from the Black arts movement, and kind of carry it into making it a more global movement. I think that we have, so we're products of a technology generation, that has obviously, and then how we're using our scholarship. We're also a generation that's gone to, it has a higher rate of like college grads and people having this kind of discourse at a collegiate level. So they're putting that discourse out on social media as well. I see what I call a lot of like college talking, on social media, like, oh, this is that, like, I've been in the college now and I'm like having these dialogues and panels, and that thinking is happening on social media. And it's great because it's just adding some critical thinking into our common social discourse.
And that's such a core of what the hip hop movement represented is, at least the early dimensions of that is having people who are looking at the politics and using the combination of the politics and the dialect and the movement and rhythm to bring the story, creating a different kind of narrative, it's a counter narrative. So you're expanding that narrative that we have, and it's really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And then so that also you did the Detroit projects before that. What you want to talk about that? Because you really get into themes around racial tension and economic instability, dreams deferred, and then the impact of the Great Recession on the auto industry. Would you share with us why you wanted to tell that, which is sort of in alignment with I imagine why you wanted to do the Temptations, but I'd like to hear more about that because that's the significant work. And I want to encourage our listening audience that they can actually purchase the book. You can go out and purchase the book on your website.
Yeah.
Give your website and on Amazon.
Yeah. The Detroit Project. Yeah, you can Google it and find it. It's their sellers, Theater Communications Group, TCG. They sell it on their website. I'm sort of pushing them over Amazon these days, but we'll,
Okay, that's good. And also our Black bookstores, African American Literature
That's right.
Book Club.
I'm actually working.
Talib Kweli has a bookstore now. You can ask him to order it.
Yes, I would love for Talib Kweli to order the Detroit Project.
Yeah, the Kweli Club has a store that's continuing tradition of Incuro books.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for big ups to your son for that. I appreciate that. But so the Detroit Project exists because I wanted to write 3 plays about my hometown, a trilogy of plays, if you will, but they're not a trilogy connected by character, they're connected by city. So it's Detroit in 1949 on the brink of a housing act that was going to ultimately bulldoze what was our Black Wall Street in Detroit, Paradise Valley, the Black business epicenter that eventually did get bulldozed based on a mayor's racist campaign to make sure that those Black people are not going to move in your neighborhood. He ran that kind of campaign and eventually led to getting rid of this Black community in Detroit. And so Detroit 67, is my play about the '67 uprising that happened in Detroit, and it looks at a family, how they sort of get caught in the middle of the politics of the riots, so-called riots, and where they fall into it, because they're trying to create new Black business at a time when businesses are getting burned. And then the last play, Skeleton Crew, is my play. The first play is called Paradise Blue, by the way.
Yes.
My final play is called Skeleton Crew, and it is set in 2008 during the Great Recession and during the threat of the auto industry collapse. And this is about a small exporting factory in Detroit, the last one standing, that is about to close, and is looking at this family of workers who are on different sides of the line on the management and worker, and how they're going to deal with this impending closing. And so yeah, all of these plays are there for me to explore the history of the city of Detroit and the history of my community and my people, my family. It's also, there's the humanity of the city of Detroit. Detroit's been written about a lot, in a lot of negative ways. I always say, sometimes when I would tell people I'm from Detroit, they look at me like I said I was from like the 10th layer of hell. And so there's a genocide happening, and maybe, but there's also Black independence going on there. And there's also
self-determination.
Definitely self-determination happening there. And there's writers happening there, and musicians and creators and business planners. And so I hated the way that people looked at us, as if the narrators about our city were not ever really from our city. They're media. The media was the loudest narrator for our city. And I thought, no, we have to go into the historical canon with narrators from our city, and for people who understand us and love us. And August Wilson had done that for Pittsburgh with his 10-play cycle on Pittsburgh. And when I was reading that, I said, I got to do this for Detroit.
Yes. Yeah, definitely the cycle. Are you going to continue with that? Because you have the 60s, and then you have 2008. So you're going to continue that cycle? Do you have plans for building on that?
Yes and no. There's one other additional, Detroit story. I will always write about Detroit, obviously, music, musicals and everything, but I don't, I feel like that cycle might be complete, but if there is one more, there might be one more that I would add posthumously to the cycle, that looks at workers' rights again. But there was a big paper strike in Detroit, and it sort of forever crippled some of the people in the working force in the newspaper industry. And so, and what that means right now, and what essential working looks like right now, those are things that are important to me. But it may or may not make it into the cycle. But I'm also doing, I'm right now working with a theater on the ground in Detroit to try to commission Detroit writers to tell stories about being essential workers and what plague and rebellion looks like in Detroit. And so I'm more interested in cultivating Detroit stories, either helping Detroit writers cultivate their own stories and bring like cinema and television to Detroit as well. So that's sort of where I'm focused.
Excuse me, is that part of what you're doing, since you now have the time, the resources to work on this grant from the MacArthur? Is that part of your projects?
Yes, it is. I mean, I feel like time and me is a tricky thing. I never have time. My plate is always overloaded with things, but yes. And one of the things that I deeply want to do, I mean, my husband and I, we bought property in Detroit right before the pandemic hit. And right before everything went into lockdown, that we were working on right up the street from the Motown Museum, where we're going to create an arts center, and an artist residency housing in the city of Detroit. So these are things that we're in like pause on, but we want to get back into. But I want to serve the arts in Detroit in more than one way.
So that really gets into looking at how the plays that you wrote, the Detroit series, and even the work you're doing now, how do they reflect the current state of America, and why are they important? What's the connection or the alignment between what you've written, what you're working on now, and the current state?
I feel like writers, we often are we're always writing about now, even when we're writing about the past, because life just, history keeps repeating itself, I say, until we get it right. And so because I wrote about Detroit 67, that's about uprisings and police shootings. And, that's obvious.
Full circle, right.
That's obvious how that's connected. I think my play Paradise Blue, which is essentially about gentrification and about a jazz community that is on the brink of being uprooted by gentrification. And it's sort of what it's looking at is internally how we can contribute to gentrification as opposed to like externally. It's also looking at like when there's a community and one among the community doesn't have the same experience as the rest of the community, how they don't have the same interest in preserving that community. And so how we internally deal with our discord, and how if one person among us is threatening to harm the entire community, how do we handle that with love, and is it even possible? And so I feel like that's now, before this pandemic moment happened, I would say that Paradise Blue was probably the most contemporary play about Detroit now. Because Detroit is going through a heavy gentrification right now, as every American city is, and that these questions are very, very potent in Detroit. And then we have Skeleton Crew, which is about workers' rights, essential workers, factory workers.
That's right. That's very prevalent, so relevant today.
So relevant. And it's just like, and what happens in Skeleton Crew is a group of workers who try to find a way, how can we stand up for each other? Not to go in on corporate sponsorships, but when we're looking at how these big businesses like Amazon and other places are treating their workers, it is problematic and kind of goes against fundamentally what I think many of us personally want to see happen in the world.
And if you don't bring that up, who will? It goes into the next, I want to bring this full circle. As a female Black playwright, what have been the challenges that you've faced and the rewards?
The challenge that I face on a daily basis is it's still very much, especially in theater, very much exists under a white gaze. And even though I don't write to the white gaze and I don't succumb to it, it is frustrating to have to, imagine having to do your play, write about Detroit, where you're from, where your whole family lives, and then you put it out on a stage in front of a majority white audience, and then majority white critics are gonna come and tell you whether you wrote about your people well. And they will say yes or no. No, she didn't. This is stereotypical. I'm stereotyping my people. You're going to tell me that? You who've never been to Detroit and me who's writing my family, or this is not authentic. You're going to tell me what's authentic about, it's like it's ridiculous. And yet that is how work moves forward in our field as it currently is structured. So if a white critic says no, the work by and large does not move forward. And I feel very oppressed by that. I feel really frustrated with it, and and it happens, and it's happening. It happens in Hollywood. It's like white gatekeepers over Black stories. It's frustrating.
Right. That's continuing. We had a program with Amani Perry, who did the book "Looking for Lorraine: The Radiant Life of Lorraine Hansberry," and Lorraine Hansberry talked about the criticism she received from A Raisin in the Sun, because they thought it should have been much more radical. And you know what she did? She decided to do the critiques herself. Mm-hmm. So then you end up having to, she took on the role of becoming a critic and began writing the reviews. And I think it speaks to what we need in every arm of the industry for the playwrights and those who are controlling the media. You ended up having an opportunity to do story scripts. That's also unusual, to be in the writing room.
That's right.
At a television station. So you have managed to kind of cross some boundaries that others have not. What message would you have for how we move forward? And why, two parts, and why do you think you were able to cross those boundaries?
We need Black people to invest in us, to come see our shows and to stand up for our aesthetic. And I think that I would like to see moving forward us invest in Black theaters, Black independent theaters, that we are on the shoulders. I mean, I'm here, my work might be done downtown at a predominantly white institution, but it is also being done up in Harlem. Like I always make sure that there's some route back to my community with my work. And I think more Black writers need that encouragement, and more Black institutions who are producing Black writers need to have more investment so that they can, and new Black theaters will be emerging out of this moment, I promise you that. And we need to make sure that we're helping them to get funded. And I say that to those of us who are everyday audience members. And I also say it to those who are in positional power, those who are celebrities. I would love for celebrities to talk to not just celebrities about what's happening in the field of entertainment. Because most celebrities, by the time they become celebrities, don't know what's happening on the ground with the majority of artists. They're not able, they've moved into a different stratosphere, and they're not always, most celebrities don't have a route back. So I would love for there to be more visibility around artists that are on the ground, doing the very grassroots work. It's like listening to go listen to the grassroots hip hop. Don't just listen to what the radio programs, right? Like go find the art, go dig in the crates and find the artists who have been doing this work for a long time on the ground.
I thank you for that. And those are the conversations that we're going to have where we honor you at the 15th National Black Writers Conference, Black Playwrights and Screenwriters at the Crossroads, Activism, Identity, and Race. And that conference will be November the 11th through the 14th. And we're honoring some of those people who laid the foundation. Carl Clay from the Black Spectrum Theater, of course, you, Stanley Nelson, a documentarian, and we have a number of playwrights and screenwriters participating in some invigorating conversations so that we will have concrete plans for what we must do. And we want audience participation. And so we look forward to having you. And I want to encourage our listening audience to visit your website. Do you want to give your website?
Oh, sure. I mean, you can go to DOMINIQUEMORISSEAU.com, but you can also probably more efficiently follow me at DO Morisseau, DOMORISSEAU, at Instagram, on Twitter, and my name, Dominique Morisseau, on Facebook. And that's where I post about what's happening, what's coming down the pipeline for me. And you can keep checking out what's happening.
Thank you for the work you do, and thank you for being an inspiration to so many people. We didn't talk about your teaching, but you're a phenomenal teacher also.
Thank you.
This is, thank you, Dominique Morisseau. This has been Writers on Writing with your host, Brenda Greene. And please write to us at writers@mec.cuny.edu. And make sure you come out to the Black Writers Conference, and make sure you check out Dominique Morisseau on Instagram, and also purchase her book.
That's right. I love the Black Writers Conference, so thank you for having me there. I've loved it ever since I moved to New York.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye.